distinguished feature of the work of that award-winning practice, it must surely be their strong focus on social housing and regeneration, revitalization. But at the same time, it has to do with the rootedness of that practice within the specific urban context or the unique urban context of Johannesburg. And in many ways, it resonates with what we're trying to do in this institution. We are also deeply rooted within the context, the unique context of Windhoek. And as architects, it is our responsibility to investigate and try and improve the conditions in our city. In many ways, Windhoek is not unlike Johannesburg. I mean, yes, scale is completely different, but it's also a post-colonial city structure with all its problems. And I think the pandemic left an indelible mark on our CBD. And many of the things that they have been grappling with in the inner city of Johannesburg, we are now having to face as architects within the city. If you walk through the CBD of Windhoek, you'll see so many buildings are empty. And there's a need for people to be creative in the way that these buildings are repurposed. Heather then went on, she actually then, apart from having achieved all these award-winning buildings, she decided to do a PhD with design. So that's a program that was introduced in, I think, 2018 at the University of the Free State. And Heather is actually the first graduate from that program. So it is a PhD with design. And I think it's wonderful to have her here. I was also privileged to be her external examiner. So I know this little book front to back. And I want you to have a look at this book. Heather, thank you for availing yourself to us. I know you've had 2 hectic days in a very, very warm Windhoek. She attended a conference at the Safari, what is it called now? And her sole experience of Windhoek the past few days is Safari. And she's just come out of the conference, and when did you start? This morning? Yeah. It's the entire day. So please give her a hand and a warm welcome.
Thank you for inviting me to speak this evening, and I'm really delighted to be finally in Windhoek. It's also difficult to choose work. I mean, I've never spoken here before, so I've chosen some projects, and if you want to look at our work, you can look at our website. So Savage and Dart Architects was founded by my partner Colin Savage and I, and we're a design-led practice based in Johannesburg. Our context is the city, and we believe in the power of design in restorative spatial justice and urban resilience. And this is reflected in the scope of works within the public realm undertaken in the practice. Can I move this slightly? Okay, here we go. We've built a specialist practice focusing on social housing, the adaptive reuse of buildings into housing, and transforming buildings from one use to another. In this example, the Science Stadium at Wits University, from a stadium into auditoria and teaching venues, as well as the provision of new university buildings. This is Saltpluike University in Kimberley. Our focus has been on creating places for people, enabling ordinary lives within an extraordinarily complex context, enabling community and neighborhood. Our tactical approach has enabled us to identify design elements in our projects that incrementally change the relationships of buildings to the urban realm. The importance of agency, of people having choice, flexibility, and variety in their environments is key to this. We believe our architecture and our city should be adaptable, equitable, and resilient. And this is what distinguishes our design tactics and our architecture. This is facilitated through the leveraging of gaps in policies and existing ways of working that enables an innovative and strategic approach. In the example on the left, integrating an active retail edge into a social housing project. Situating our practice at the intersection of policy and practice. Working within the context of the post-apartheid city, we have developed an ability to read and to respond to the changing dynamics of the city, to spot the gaps that enable opportunity. Yet, as the city continually changes and mutates, we are challenged to continually rethink our tactics and question, how does one's practice change to meet these challenges? This is a photograph of the fire in Johannesburg about a month ago, and in the forefront is our social housing project. I've just completed a practice-based PhD at the University of the Free State, which is a new program in South Africa. Professor Jonathan Noble characterizes creative research in architecture as the challenge of capturing and curating the essence of your work, and as a transformative practice that opens new creative challenges. The PhD allowed me to synthesize within our body of work a tactical approach relating to a series of spatial tactics and design tools. Spatial tactics therefore presents the work of Savage and Dodd architects over a span of more than 25 years, exploring a series of tactical approaches related to urban integration and transformation. The thinking on this has been enabled by the research work undertaken during the PhD. The challenge with this is how to distill how we design and how and why we practice in a very specific context, and how our spatial practice is formed within this space, and what is the essence of our spatial practice. When I began my PhD, I characterized my work into 3 parts, but I was unsure of how these merged into an approach to practice rather than pieces of practice. In fact, at the basis of this questioning was the question, what is architecture? Is everything we do architecture? Or is there a division between spatial reconfiguration and architecture, or architecture and building? And this is because our experience working in tricky context is very far removed from the images seen in glossy magazines and discussed in architecture schools. The process of discovery within the PhD study began with the extraction of a series of design motifs in an exhibition of our practice work held in 2018, and then mapped out in a giant mind map. Using this as a base, further extrapolation through the PhD symposia led to the understanding that our work has a common thread of what we have termed spatial tactics. We engage in a series of design strategies and tools, and as I worked through my portfolio diagramming our buildings, I identified a series of tactics related to the use of courtyards, verandas, and street, and design tactics related to the way we put buildings together and take them apart. Small moves is an incremental, small-scale, adaptive process within the larger scale of the city. Thus, our spatial practice is defined as a tactical practice, informing this practice of small moves through engaging a series of spatial and design tactics. It is these tactics that tie our practice body of work together. In a recent exhibition called Spatial Tactics, hosted by the Cape Institute of Architecture a couple of months ago, I've condensed and collated our spatial tactics into a series of meta themes relating to how these tactics of veranda, courtyard, and street relationships contribute to urban integration and transformation. And these are tactics of urban integration, which is about mediating the edge condition and integrating our buildings into the urban fabric of the city, the street, and how they respond to a series of edge conditions with elements such as verandas, courtyards, colonnades, balconies, and other devices. Spaces between, where elements such as courtyards are used as elements of placemaking and exploring the urban relationships between public and private realms. Tactics for maximizing space, which use elements such as lofts as tactics to extend the envelope of the building and to strategically maximize space. And the idea of room explored within the city. I'll now focus on a few projects selected from our portfolio and illustrate this process of discovery and how these tactics are employed. In our housing adaptive reuse project, we identified a series of tactics for transformation that illustrated the approach and design tools used to form new hybrid topologies in pursuit of adaptive transformation of buildings and urban fabric. These included joining buildings together, densifying through rooftop extensions, maximizing the FAR, cutting out courtyards, and infill strategies. These show how a series of buildings that have been converted from industrial or office usage into residential, employing these strategies. As an example of the adaptive reuse of buildings is Paris House, a conversion project developed in the inner city of Johannesburg by a private sector client who has built a portfolio of affordable housing. In this project, 3 buildings were joined together, pieces of building extracted to form an internal courtyard, and the building extended with duplex loft units on the roof. And the bulk of the building is maximized by considering the roof as real estate to add additional floors. The layout explores a series of alternate unit topologies in pursuit of affordability, from self-contained units to cluster units, which are 4 to 6 rooms sharing bathrooms and kitchens, and rooms with shared amenities. And this illustrates how a range of family configurations and affordability levels can be accommodated within a single building. And it illustrates how a housing ladder of affordability within a building can be achieved. And this is further supported by social amenities such as a ground floor creche. Multifunctional hybrid shows how the combination of a complex mixed-use program and manipulation of the building envelope through insertions and extractions results in what we call a JEPI hybrid, a new typology in the inner city of Johannesburg. This is an existing building dating from late 50s, 60s, and it's completely transformed internally. It's a project that builds on our spatial knowledge of complex building adaptation and interlocking spaces. Ordinary as it may seem from the outside, the building reveals an extraordinarily rich compilation of spaces and microarchitectures in between. It shows how the combination of a complex mixed-use program and manipulation of the building envelope through insertions and extractions results in this JEPI hybrid, which is a new typology in the inner city of Johannesburg, driven by the migrant, diasporan, Ethiopian, and Somalian communities that have set up businesses in this area of Johannesburg. So it demonstrates these tactics of transformation of cut, extract, insert, maximize. This sequence of drawings shows how the building was changed into this prototype, hybrid prototype, containing 3 floors of retail and 5 floors of residential above. And it's a true mixed-use, multifunctional building. So this sketch shows the first moves made to reconfigure the ground floor of the building with an arcade or a street cut through the building and a new built section. Assumptions that I had about corner opportunities, entrances, and points of circulation were continually challenged. And those ideas that are sort of put down as retail lessons that one must observe that are supposed to be obvious, such as corner exposure and central entrances, were completely upended in this project. The arcade was a well-known typology in old Johannesburg, and it was used to create shopfront exposure, cutting through the small Johannesburg blocks. It's a typology that was borrowed from the arcade architecture of European cities, and one that doesn't exist anymore in Johannesburg, but was clearly articulated by my Ethiopian client. And this sequence shows how the building was changed. A 3-story piece was added to maximize the building footprint, whilst an arcade or street was cut through the ground level, reorientating and densifying the retail space. 2 new circulation staircases were inserted into the building, linking the 3 retail levels. And just understand that 3 levels of retail is something that most people say doesn't exist, except in very, very specific places like Hong Kong, Singapore, but it does exist, but only in a very small portion of Johannesburg. And the arcade was repeated on the upper retail levels with the housing level separated from these. Working on projects like these, where a building is subjected to major physical changes, resulting in a completely new understanding of its function and place in the city, challenges us to think differently about established ways of working and thinking about how buildings function within the changing economies of the city. The ground floor relationship of building edge to street is reconfigured, and an internal street or arcade is cut through the building. The relationship of the edge of the building as a series of open kiosks talks to the activity of the street. It defines the building's urban relationship to the activity of the street, particularly the informal trading housed in the narrow space of the pavement. And the entrance of the building was seen as the most profitable rental space, something that seems obvious, but also counterintuitive to entering a building that also contained a housing component. The staircases, and this is the entrance during construction, where it was being completely reconfigured. The arcade is repeated on the retail floors as an internal street, populated here by a series of restaurants. And the interior arcades of streets are densely populated, punctuated with small spaces, such as this coffee shop, and a series of what I call micro-architecture, spaces within spaces. And this building forms part of a genre of mixed-use, multifunctional JP hybrids. And it's worth noting this area, known as JP, achieves higher rentals than Sandton City, which is one of the premium shopping destinations in Johannesburg. This building is an example of dense, integrated, mixed-use city living environments. And you might question, is this architecture? And did we just merely set up the spatial moves? The second project I want to show you is the Pretoria North Magistrates Courts. And the spatial lessons learned here were invaluable in understanding the spatial puzzle of Pan Africa House, the previous project. And this is because magistrates' courts are a series of complex, interlocking, yet separate spaces where different users of space are separated. This is a very clear separation between public and private and secure spaces in relation to circulation. So in the Pretoria North Magistrates Courts, the courtyard and veranda are used to provide structured open space within a public building as a public commons, linked to the idea of an internal street within the building, as shown in the next sequence of drawings and photographs. The veranda acts as a threshold space enclosing a courtyard. And it uses the idea of street to conceptualize a circulation space within a public building with several levels of secured public-private access. In this, the overriding concept was to create a public space with visual links to outdoor courtyards within a deep space building. And flipping back to the street of Pan Africa. This set of diagrams shows the configuration of courtyard to veranda to street. And when I say street, it's an internal circulation space, but it's conceptualized as a street in terms of its publicness. The next project is Solplaatje University, where there were a series of project informants. Referring back to my diagramming process, I noticed that these diagrams on the left, Pretoria North Magistrates Courts, and the right, on the left, Pretoria North Magistrates Courts, and the right, Solplaatje University, more than 15 years apart, shared a common spatial massing using similar spatial elements. Solplaatje University is located in the Northern Cape, I guess in a very similar landscape to Windhoek. The campus is designed as an open campus integrated into the town. The city becomes the university, and the university the city. And the first phase of the university was completed in 2016 with a series of buildings completed by 5 different firms of architects working to a common urban framework development by Ludwig Hansen. And our building is over here. Sorry, the people online can't see that. I can do that. That building is there. These vignettes generated as part of the competition phases tried to place a series of imagined characters into the space of the buildings we imagined. The socio-political context of South Africa forms an important background to the fast-changing landscape of higher education in the country. The concepts of belonging and ownership are important. So we considered what a university building could be in terms of typologies that would encourage connectivity and social learning that are driving new modalities of teaching and learning, but more importantly, how to place students at the heart of the learning experience in an integrated live, learn, work environment. Later, we photographed students using the spaces. This is a mixed-use, multifunctional university building that faces onto a public urban square and together with the adjoining buildings wraps around internal courtyards. The courtyard, the veranda, and the edges are key spatial tactics. Using diagrams to extract and define our spatial tactics, and in doing so, draw out the unifying themes within the work, the spatial tactics distilled in these drawings have revealed that the edges of space in our buildings are articulated in relation to the placement of the mass and volume of the building and the penetration through these. And in this set of diagrams, I was trying to show the relationship of courtyard and the relationship of an internal open space, which could be considered as an internal commons, and an outdoor an outdoor courtyard, which is connected through a veranda entrance sequence space, which actually is considered as a outdoor room. This shows the colonnaded edge, the relationship of the building to the outside or the public square. The movement sequence from the entrance through the staircase up onto a large-scale veranda space, which is shaded with a movable screen that can move in the wind. It provides an amazing sort of colored shade. The room internally considered as an indoor public space, which is informed by the landscape of the Northern Cape, where thorn trees break the horizon and provide shade. And that's not a real tree, that's a shadow. And I've watched the space being used for a multitude of uses. The first cohort of students placed their hands into the wet concrete of the bench, signifying their ownership of the space. In the last project, I will show how the process of diagramming was used tactically as part of the design strategy in understanding how to adapt and retrofit an existing building. And in this way, I think it draws our different strands of practice together, showing a continuity of spatial practice through our spatial and design tactics. This is the Flower Hall at Wits University, one of our most recent projects, where we refurbished an existing building, which was originally the Flower Hall from the old Rand Easter showgrounds before it was, which was taken over by the university in the late 1980s. And we densified it with the insertion of an additional floor and mezzanine level. So essentially, we built a building within a building. The building was used as an exams venue, and most people remember it as one of the most uncomfortable and cold places that they ever wrote an exam in. So these diagrams show that the same spatial tactics are employed in this work to adapt and transform the building. Firstly, an infill, a new north lobby, which joined the two buildings together. Inserting a new floor and mezzanine level. Inserting a new entrance lobby within the volume of the existing building. New staircases and services, and new facade glazing. And this is an extremely simple concept, but with extremely complex service coordination and extremely difficult actually to build, to put a whole new floor in an existing building. And this just shows you the layout of the inside. And in the end, a social media post on LinkedIn received an astonishing amount of comments showing the intersection between memory and experience, which is about the fact that buildings are the backdrop to the life of the university. So in conclusion, whilst we adapt and transform, repurpose, at the heart of it is a series of spatial tactics that we hope enable community, neighborhood, and spatial transformation. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. That was so interesting. I've never seen project, so that was quite a surprise. We're now going to open for questions. If anyone has a question that they want to ask Heather, I think a lot of things that Heather's touched on. We always talk about the importance of knowing the regulations. You can't fiddle the regulations if you don't know the regulations. If you know the weaknesses within, you are able to utilize them. That's where the idea of balcony, veranda, etc. If you look at our bulk requirements, it's exactly the same. So it provides you with tools to, in a way, manipulate an existing structure or even a new structure. But you've done it in terms of heights as well, the double volume heights, and very cleverly so. But that was the Brickfields that we described.
Yeah.
But I think this whole process, I see there's 1/5 student. We've been talking about the process of design and how important it is in a way to reflect on it and then realize your specific approach to design, because we all have different approaches. And I think what's interesting from Heather's work is the fact that even though these projects are completely different in terms of typology, it's the same tactics that you use. And sometimes it's something that I think is almost, it's a gut reaction. It's not something that you do deliberately. When you go back and you analyze it, then you see, okay, it's something that I'm using all the time. Sometimes it's intuitive, but sometimes it is deliberate. So please ask questions. Tomorrow, the second years are going to spend some time with us, so you better ask questions and others. Anyone? Oh, I see. Very giving us. Oh, sorry. And Dominica, thank you. Yes.
What should we consider things like scale?
Sorry, just slow down. I can't hear you.
What should we consider when working with diagrams at the larger scale?
So working with diagrams, what,
Diagrams.
sorry?
Diagrams.
That's what you're asking.
I don't understand. What is that?
The diagrams with the column. Y-shaped
Y-shaped column on. And that was just something we wanted to do. Design. We just wanted to create a different kind of support colonnade structure.
I saw on the website of the practice as well that it's more involved in not just sustainability aspect as well. It's obviously something that's rising a lot in the architectural world. Everyone knows about it. How is your approach to sustainable art, especially when working at this? Moving forward, not only sustainability, this is actually building.
Yeah, so in the new build projects, for instance, like Solplaatjies and that latest flower hall, we use, we've used passive technologies for heating and cooling. So Solplaatjies, which has probably a similar temperature range to here, gets really very hot, but also very cold in winter. There we've used thermal slabs to passively heat and cool the building, so we wouldn't have any air conditioning at all. And in the flower hall, we've used 4 chilled beams to achieve a similar outcome. But in existing buildings, particularly the existing residential work that we do, which is trying to reach an affordable market, what we mean by reusing buildings, the carbon content of reusing a building is enormous. So if you have been following the Copenhagen UIA declarations that came out of the UIA conference in June, they're all about reusing, recycling. In fact, they say we shouldn't be building any new buildings, which is not really something that we can do in Africa, because we have we have a growing population, not a shrinking population like they have in Europe. So, I mean, the reuse of existing buildings is important because they embody a lot of carbon, and then to try and wherever possible just embed good sustainable design principles within the building. So the use of energy is very important. So lighting, particularly heating, the heating of water, and the use of water, very important to try and reduce the amount of water used in buildings.
I just wanted to say it's great work. I'm really impressed, and I love your spatial arrangement. So my favorite project of all of this was the downtown Joburg project, with where you had the multifunctional, did you call it hybrid?
Yes.
Yeah. And I'm not so sure anymore, was that also with the living spaces where they share common spaces, or was that another project?
So that building has 3 stories of retail, 5 stories of residential above.
Okay. But I saw this one footprint where you have shared kitchen and bathrooms and so on.
Yeah, that's
in both cases, and also the one with the arcades. What were the local regulations? Because I think in Namibia it would be impossible
Exactly.
to achieve something like that. And I think this density in downtown areas and getting social housing in this is
So
really,
I'm
really
flipping.
essential.
Sort of flipping back,
It's inclusive and it's integrating people that otherwise would not be able to afford, either to rent.
sorry, where did I have it? Right at the beginning, there.
Yeah,
There. So,
yeah, that was the one, I think, and then before was the one with the arcades.
yeah, so essentially, I mean, what we were trying to do here was try and provide a range of affordability. So, like to try and see how small a unit we could make. So I think we've got units at about 16 square meters. As small micro studio units. And then the idea of that's just really one big unit. I mean, it could be it's like a 4-bedroom unit. I mean, the idea behind that is that, I mean, probably idealistically, you could say that it's a family. I mean, we don't have traditional family arrangements anymore. It's not 2 parents and 2 children or 1 child. I mean, if you look at how people live in the city, it's often maybe it's 2 women sharing with their kids, or a couple and a sister or a brother, or people that are completely sublet units without any. They don't know the people at all. They just sublet a unit because they can't afford to live in a 2-bedroom unit. So they rent a 2-bedroom unit and they sublet the one bedroom. So this was trying to respond to that by saying, well, actually then, why don't we have a big unit that you could have? I mean, theoretically, you could have a big family that actually had that. Then they had 1 room was the living room and they had 3 bedrooms. And 1 bedroom was sublet to somebody else, and the 1 bedroom was for their children and 1 bedroom was for themselves. That really doesn't actually happen. It's more or less that people, you know, it's 1 person or 2 people per bedroom. But that was the idea, to explore that. And then the idea of rooms is really that that despite the fact that South Africa has you know, a history of rooms in buildings, often on the roofs, that were for servants in the inner city, they haven't gone away. And in fact, they are the most sought after form of accommodation. Yeah.
But as what did you submit this? Because it's rooms and then they share, it's very uncommon, like, as I said.
Yeah, we just,
maybe it's probably.
yeah, we submitted it as
a hotel or?
No, as a residential, as a multi-residential
Yeah,
Look, you know,
it's so functional.
I mean, the designation of residential is actually outdated anyway, because you've got H1, which is an individual house, you've got H2, which is a hotel, and H3, which is everything else. So in fact, I mean, there should be like a multitude of things, but this is a multi-unit residence.
How would that go?
It's rental.
It's all rented.
It's all rental.
And the client was public or private?
Private client.
I think ownership would work the same, even better, because the owners will age there, and then in the end, it's not in the beginning young families and everybody gets old at the same time, so it's always a mix of different ages and so on.
Yeah, it could be. I mean, we also tried to make like the fact that, you know, this, you know, that there isn't, like in this case where you'd have doors onto a walkway. There's a bit of a sort of a privacy separation here. But I mean, you know, in Europe, you also have you have mixed use housing where you have old age homes and student housing together, because it works well, because there's kind of a synergy between people. And so it's not, I mean, you could do something like that here.
Yeah, but in some of the other examples, you know, you could challenge the idea of, you know, a room being a room and having walls. I mean, you've used curtains to.
No, not really.
So just go back to one of your I think it's in, no, it's not in this building.
Do you mean the screen?
A screen, but it's a movable screen.
Yeah, that was a nice.
I have one more question to this layout, because the floor surface is quite big, and I see three staircases, which I suppose are the fire escape staircases as well. But you didn't have to separate this big area like in.
Yeah, but this is an existing building, so.
So you
So,
have to
I mean,
update it.
this was actually one building. This is another building. This is another building. They happened to be built all at the same time as one building, but they were actually three buildings.
But you connect them.
Yeah, but we connected them. So we connected them. We couldn't connect through here. But there was a whole set, there was a series of smaller, there was one light well here and one here. So we connected that all together. And then those staircases are existing.
But how did you get, then, how would you get fire compliance, for example?
Because you need two alternative means of escape. So there's three. Yeah, sure. No, that's completely compliant. Yeah. I just wanted to go back to, I mean, there's the courtyard you can see here. So we knocked out to make a courtyard. Yeah. So here's the three, 1, 2, 3 buildings. Courtyard, we took that piece out, and then we built a whole piece on top.
Are there none of your buildings you actually deal with? One of the critical issues here, I think, if we were to tackle any refurbishment or regeneration of buildings within the CBD, first thing that the city always wants you to look at is provision of parking. So how do you deal with that?
So Johannesburg has a no, interestingly enough, has a no parking requirement in the inner city of, which is, there's a kind of a line called Zone A. And it actually dates from the 1970s, interestingly enough. You know, when they were trying to, at that point, they were trying to encourage people to come by bus into the inner city. So that actually just means you don't need parking. And then subsequent to that, Johannesburg has, so unfortunately, as soon as you move out of that zone, you need to provide parking, and it becomes a bit problematic. Because a lot of buildings like this one sit right on the edge of that parking zone, and people don't have cars. So there is the ability to ask for relaxation of parking based on where the buildings are located. If they're well located in terms of the inner city, what they call the nodes and transportation nodes. Johannesburg has tried to implement a BRT, a bus rapid transit system, not particularly successfully at this point. But, you know, one motivates that it is near to, you know, within a couple of 100 meters of public transport. I mean, the reality is that public transport is everywhere because taxis are everywhere, and most people rely on taxis. So, but that is problematic because if parking has to drive it, then one can't provide the density of inner city living with parking.
It's interesting because I know that in Cape Town they also introduced the zero parking, and they very quickly cancelled it again.
Well, parking in Cape Town, I mean, is I mean, extremely expensive if you want to buy a parking bay.
Any other questions, Fred?
Okay. In terms of how you go about it, you study your regulations and then you find loopholes within that. I just want to know, what's the reception of the residents then on their end? Do they just do this out of necessity that they need a place, or how do they receive now? I'm interested in new ways of living.
Well, I think there's a huge demand for housing in, well, globally. I mean, globally, there's a huge demand for housing. You must just read the newspapers in London and see where people live, and how much it costs them to live in a space the size of a parking bay. So, I mean, people people want space. I mean, everybody wants more space than they can afford. I mean, everybody would like a 2-bedroom apartment, but they can only afford a 1-bedroom apartment. But some people don't want an apartment. Some people, I mean, some people that are maybe they're a construction worker, they're going to be working in Johannesburg for 6 months, and then they're going to be working in, 300 kilometers away. And so they don't, and their home is actually not in Johannesburg. It might be in KwaZulu-Natal or something. So they might actually have a home, or they do have a home there. Maybe they've even got a housing subsidized home somewhere else. And they just want a room or a place to share for the time that they are working in Johannesburg as cheaply as possible. They want a place to put their stuff, to be safe, and that's all. So people want different kinds of accommodation, and you need to be able to service that. And people also move, people move around all the time. People don't, and work moves around all the time. I mean, we don't live in a city that's an inner city with a factory over there. And work is mobile. I mean, we live in a multinodal, very complex city.
So I really appreciate the fact that you showed the income brackets and so on with the square meterage. But is there also a engagement process with prospective tenants? Or is that just left open? That's the sort of the first question. Because I know in Jeppystown, there are a lot of people that live in very precarious situations, have eviction orders against them, that kind of thing. So do you know who the prospective people are that might rent there? And do you engage with them? That's the first question. And then the second set of questions is a little bit more pragmatic in the sense of what are the sort of challenges that you deal with to get services in these industrial buildings that are really deep? I understand you're cutting out voids and stuff, but maybe contextualizing for the students a little bit about what are the practical challenges regarding opening up, getting services and circulation in there, and then also the considerations in terms of adding loading on top of the roof. How do you go about that, which I'm assuming is lightweight steel construction.
Okay, so we don't directly engage with prospective tenants. Our clients know what their market is and drive what they want to do, and it's very much driven by feasibility and project financial. In fact, in this particular project, rooms weren't initially included. It was a way of trying to get the feasibility to work. However, having said that, I mean, we spend a lot of time in the inner city looking at how people live and observing how their people live and observing how people use the spaces in the buildings that we have done and seeing, how they use the space. That's the first question. The second question. So, I mean, we really view the building as a site. So that's an internal site, which is really modulated by columns, beams, the windows, and that gives us what we have to work with. And then it's completely new services that are put in, new electrical, new plumbing, that is reticulated through the building. And then, these older buildings are very, very sturdy, and they were built as factories. They were built to withstand machines, loading of machines. Often many of them were used in the garment trade. So they had sewing machines and so on them. So they're very, very, I mean, look at the size of the beams. So, they can withstand additional loading in most cases. So we balance the amounts of stuff we can put on a building with the amount of FAR available. So it's normally 2 to 3 stories. Obviously, we want to avoid extending a lift So often we've put, say, duplex units on, so you actually come up to the top level and then you walk. And actually it's actually easier and cheaper to do it in conventional construction than lightweight steel.
Because as mentioned, this is an issue that's going to develop this side again. So is there a method of reporting or noting how well the designers are working with this public realm? Because if, as policies change, we have to sort of have research and factual information. So as the design is working in the public realm right now, is there any sort of information available based future designs on the working?
Well, I think it's really, if a building is let, then, that's sort of ultimately, it's the proof of the pudding. I mean, if it's not let or if it is a high tenant turnover, then it's problematic, although that might be also location and because of its location. But I mean, if a building is well managed, and kept and safe and a good place and with affordable rentals, then and it's continually let, then that's really, I think, the success of it.
Said that you guys are particularly interested in evacuating. So the client, in these cases, the client come to you and say, "We want to do this. Are you interested in us, or are you also specific for they already in the city and approaching the client rather than architect, developer sort of perspective?" Because even here we've got some buildings that are extremely dilapidated. But it seems like that linkage is still not very clear. Are the clients coming to the architects, or do they not even think of these possible alternative uses for their building?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of things. I mean, and I think we've been lucky because there's been a sort of a combination of things in Johannesburg that has allowed this work to be done. I mean, one is that the city engaged a urban development zone, which made that you could get rebates on your tax if you refurbish buildings. So that was important, and the availability of financing by a bank, in particular urban bank focused on urban housing finance. And then I guess it's a combination of sort of people getting to know you or looking for work or seeing what's available.
The idea subsidies actually allocated to social housing under the legislation that you have.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, that's an interesting one because unfortunately this building, and we've actually been looking at it because the client would like to sell it. And unfortunately, if it has to be refinanced in terms of the social housing criteria, we would have to change quite a lot about it. And primarily, although we were involved in writing the norms and standards for social housing, where we suggested that that the size of units had to reduce because everybody in the market said that a 30 square meter unit is too big. So we have to be allowed to take it right down. We said to 18 square meters. And we suggested that an average unit size across a building of 30 square meters would be a good way to go. And in fact, I tested it on this building and we easily achieve an average of 30 square meters across the building. But the social housing regulatory authority don't fund rooms. Only units. So we would have to change that whole half of the building into self-contained units. And we would also probably break up the cluster units into smaller units. So that's it's quite sad because in fact the affordability in the inner city for the really low incomes is a room. If you I did quickly show you that fire that happened in Johannesburg about 6 weeks ago, and that's really put the spotlight on people living in the inner city. And I don't know where it is. Oh well. The reality is that all of those people living in abandoned and hijacked buildings is that they are paying rental. You know, they are paying 800 or 1,000 rand a month. They're just not paying it to the owner of the building. So, you know, that means that they have got the ability to pay rent, but they can't afford a whole apartment. So in fact, what they can afford is a room. So it's just a pity that that social housing doesn't fund that.
A form of a boarding hotel whatsoever.
No. So that's why, like, the cluster rooms is also a bit of a trying to make. I mean, it also makes rooms, but in an apartment, because you can rent them out separately.
And you've got the right parking requirements for the land and so on. What you need is a kitchen, 20 rooms. And you submit it and you go along because the unit of measurement, one unit is it similar there that it's the kitchen specifically that you have is the kitchen the unit of measurement when you say a unit, or do you mean kitchen and bathroom and then?
Yeah, a self-contained unit is a bathroom and a kitchen in a unit.
Maybe if I remember the units, the kitchen doesn't have to have like natural light.
A habitable room has to have.
Through the room.
Not really. I mean, I think it's something you can sort of debate, but all habitable rooms have to have natural light and ventilation.
Most of the kitchen I saw in the big layouts, they're like to the corridor.
Yeah, they're to the corridor. You can do that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you can do that. But you can't have an internal kitchen.
Maybe a comment to the sketch. No? I like the way now how you present by hand drawings as well. Maybe to the students, it's not always necessary to have a computer.
It's like, now.
No, it's still a comparison.
Yeah.
I cannot agree more. And it has a story.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's drawn by my partner, Colin. He's very good at these kind of drawings. So it was just an idea of trying to make a building as a city as a building, as all of the things that happen.
Well, thank you. I think there's a lot to take in. Yeah, it was extremely interesting. I think there's a long way for us to go. I think of the challenges that lie within our own system. But it's wonderful to see what you as a practice have, what your practice achieved. And in a way, some of the experimental stuff actually things became almost like an accepted standard. You see, that's the way to do it, is to write the legislation yourself. Well, let's just give Heather a big hand.
Switches.
maybe this suits us all. I was just wondering, Connor, what is the range we have for tomorrow?
We have the range, the times, we have about, I wanted to speak to you, but now I'm asking, I'm going to time to her, and then I'll send out this to the students for,